return on investment. Whenever you're taking an audience's time to speak to them, they are investing their time in what you have to say. You need to make sure that you're giving them a worthwhile return on that investment. And if they feel that they've got a good ROI, they'll be happy to listen to you again. And that is a pretty good mark of success. Welcome to the Ideas on Stage podcast, your regular insight into leadership communication.
Hey Phil, welcome to the show. Actually, I should say welcome back to the show.
It's always a pleasure to be back on the show. And hello, Andrea. And I have to say, what a great job you've been doing running all of these podcasts and having so many fantastic guests on recently. I'm in very good company.
Thank you, Phil. You are one of those fantastic guests for sure. And so I said welcome back because, of course, this is not the first time that you appear on the show. The first or second time there's always a special occasion. A few years ago, it was the launch of your book, Business Presentation Revolution. And now you're back because there is another special occasion. We want to celebrate a great milestone that you've achieved, which is the fact that your TEDx talk has been viewed more than 1 million times. So congratulations. And how does that feel? You've got more than 1 million people who watched your talk.
Well, thanks, Andrea. I mean, it feels very humbling, to be quite honest, that that many people have taken the time to watch it. Now, I don't know with how YouTube counts views, whether that's 1 million people have started watching it and then thought, that's rubbish, and stopped watching it. I'm not sure whether that's 1 million people have actually watched it to the end. But I do know a lot of people have. And honestly, I mean, I didn't become a public speaking coach and presentation specialist in order to get rich. Certainly, I would have found a lot better ways to get rich. No, I did this in order to make a difference in the world. And while I'm working with one customer or one company at a time, the TED Talk, or the TEDx talk, I should say, is really, it's a way to touch more people and to give them something which can help them. And it's humbling, but it's also very gratifying to understand that there are people out there who have seen something in the methodology I've shared, who have been inspired by it, and who are using it to improve their own communication. And that makes what I do worthwhile.
You said that the reason why you do what you do is because you want to make an impact, you want to make a difference in the world. Do you remember any memorable interactions with somebody that perhaps watched your talk and then after that reached out to you, sharing something, a story, something positive that happened to them as a result of them watching your talk? Can you recall anything in particular?
Well, I'm past 50 now, so my recollection is not as good as it used to be. But there have been quite a few. And there was one just last autumn, actually, where I was contacted by a young lady, an American lady, I believe, in Japan. And she was teaching in Japan as part of a fellowship. And she was teaching a class in a rural area. And she happened to see my talk, like it, and think, the children could benefit from that. So what she did was she showed it to them and then helped to explain it. And she also then used the audience transformation roadmap, which is, of course, the core method I cover in this TEDx talk. And she showed it to them and she used exercises with that to help them to build presentations. And not only did the class like it, that would be enough if the class is finding it helpful. But the reason she wrote to me in particular is that one of her young pupils had been very quiet and he had trouble communicating even with his family. He was quite, I think we'd often say introverted, although that's really the wrong word. It's more that he did not know or did not feel comfortable expressing himself. And therefore, he actually was inspired by this method. And so she helped him with his presentations. He ended up becoming a lot more confident, being able to express himself using this framework. And it turned out he even ended up winning a public speaking competition after a few months using it. And so she reached out to me on LinkedIn and told me about this and even shared some photographs of it with, luckily, with the young person's face blurred out. But it was inspiring to me to see how somebody else has taken this methodology and then run with it and made a difference in a young person's life. So I was delighted by that. I sent them a couple of autographed books to see whether that would help them then to take it further or whatever. They seem to like it as well. So overall, very happy story. And I think the happiest person out of all it was probably me, because it shows that I'm able to make a difference. And I think we all in life need to be able to make a difference somehow.
That's a great example, a great story of illustrating the impact, the difference that we can make, that's possible with the things that you do, Phil. And you mentioned the audience transformation roadmap, which is a framework that we use when we work with our clients, and it's the core of your TEDx talk. And I'm curious, what made you decide to cover that in your talk? In the end, TEDx is all about ideas worth sharing. Now, you've been doing this for almost 20 years. You could have picked many other areas when it comes, or topics when it comes to public speaking, presenting, communication in general. You chose the audience transformation roadmap, the ATR, as we call it in particular, which is, by the way, something that the clients pay us to teach them. And you decided to focus your talk on that particular framework. What made you decide that that was your idea worth sharing?
I think probably I was inspired by two people, one of whom has been on this podcast, Seth Godin, and the other one who hasn't yet been on this podcast, Simon Sinek. And so Seth, I've been following him for years, right? Absolute gold dust, everything he says. And he always says, give away your best content. Give away your best content. And when you do that, good things will happen. And people will realize what value you have, and they'll ask you for work. And so that was one thing. So the audience transformation roadmap is probably one of the best things that we've come up with. And I still remember when I came up with it. I was working with a pharmaceutical company, actually, and we were brainstorming ahead of an event. We were trying to come up with an event for medical directors. And I remember just going to the flip chart and starting to like write down, what do we want people to know afterwards? And I wrote know in the top left. And then I was thinking, and I didn't write believe. I said, what do we want them to think? So that was the first version. And then I changed it to believe shortly afterwards. What do we want them to think? What do we want them to feel? And it just came naturally. And it's like, okay, and what do we want them to do? And then it occurred to me, okay, well, if we should also ask those questions, what are they doing before? So in fact, the first time we did it, it was kind of in reverse order. And so then I realized before and after, and then we thought, well, what can we do? What can we do in this event in order to do that? So that's where it came from. And I realized on that very first day how powerful that could be. So yes, I firmly believe it is one of the best techniques that we have that we can offer, and which indeed our clients are very happy to pay us for. Why give it away? Well, Seth said, give away your best content. Simon Sinek, or Sinek, I never know exactly how to pronounce it. He did a TEDx talk many years ago about his famous golden circle. You start with why in the middle, and then you go to how, and then you go to what, whereas most companies will start with what and then potentially explain how and maybe never get to the why. And that was an inspiring talk. It's had a lot of success. And it occurred to me, well, if he's able to get a lot of success by sharing this simple method, a very, very simple technique that can really touch a lot of people, well, it occurred to me that the audience transformation roadmap is also simple, it's also easy to understand, and it could also help a lot of people. So that was how I pitched it. That was the aim, is we can touch a lot of people, and we believe that it would be very worthwhile for the TEDx event where I was participating.
And that's how you sold the idea to the TEDx event. And What was I'm curious, Phil, what was the impact for you? We started talking about the impact for the people. More than 1 million people watched it. For you personally, is there anything worth mentioning, either on a personal level or on a professional level?
Good question. On a professional level, not much has changed because in the area where I work, I was already pretty well known before that. And I'd worked with hundreds of TEDx speakers before I ended up doing my own. So in that area, no, it probably didn't have a huge impact. It's not as if I became an overnight celebrity. It's not as if I now drive around in a Rolls Royce and with my own private jet. Wouldn't want one anyway. On a personal level, it was very interesting to be on the other side of the curtain. Because usually at a TEDx event, I'm backstage, I'm helping the speakers, I'm encouraging them, having helped them with their talks, having helped them to prepare. And then I'm seeing them go out onto that red circular carpet and do their best on the day. This time it was me doing that. And it was an interesting experience. But I did make sure that I also had my own coach, because you can't be your own coach. Doesn't matter how good you are, you cannot be your own coach. And so I'm very glad that I was able to experience the TEDx preparation and coaching process from, as I said, the other side of the curtain. And it gives me a new insight, and I believe helps me to help the other speakers a lot more. And as we are recording this, I'm just busy preparing the TEDx Saclay 2024. So that'll be, I've lost count whether it's the 9th or the 10th, because we started in 2015. And we've got some great speakers this year as well. And I'm really looking forward to putting some of this into practice and helping them as much as possible.
Tell me more about being on the other side of the curtain in terms of coaching. So you mentioned that, of course, you are a presentation specialist, a public speaking expert yourself, yet you've decided to work with a coach. I believe at the time it was Rose Bloomfield, who used to work with us with Ideas on Stage. She worked with us as a presentation coach, as a presentation director. So tell me more about how you see these, like, in terms of the importance of coaching.
I think a coach offers many different things. I often like to say that what I offer would be three things. The first is understanding of communication. Clearly, you're not going to be a very good communication coach if you don't understand what it is to be a good speaker, if you don't understand the art of storytelling and things like that. The second thing is an understanding in general of business. Now, not all TED Talks are around business, of course, but the people I'm generally speaking to in this are professional people who are delivering presentations as part of their job, which isn't always in a company. It's often a lot of people who've come back to me and have really appreciated this have been teachers, as it happens. And then the third thing I have to offer is ignorance. And I have a lot of ignorance of a lot of subjects. And that helps because that way the coach can put themselves in the audience's position. There is always this curse of knowledge where a speaker knows everything there is to know about the subject and is fascinated by all of the tiny details, whereas the audience doesn't know them, doesn't want to know them, doesn't need to know all of those details. And it's very important, therefore, that a coach can put themselves in the audience position and basically say, I don't know anything about that. I did not understand that first draft of your talk. How can we make this in a way which is relatable to the vast majority of the audience? And so that is what the coach will do in many ways. Now, when it comes to the audience transformation roadmap, I've been teaching it for 10 years now. And so I know what I do. What I don't see is everybody who's never heard of it before and how they are going to react to it, and especially in a stage situation. Because if I had, like Simon Sinek, a flip chart and I was able to draw on it, that would be interesting, and that might have made it a little bit easier. As it is, I didn't have that. I just had a screen, and so I had to mimic a flip chart and post it or sticky notes on the computer screen, effectively on the big screen behind me. And so I'd never really shared it in that way before. So working with a coach and working with Rose in this situation was fantastic, because she could then see, okay, Phil, you know what? That doesn't really work, or that's not big enough, or how about a different idea? And so she really gave me some invaluable help.
So you've decided to consciously put yourself in the or get access to an external perspective. Again, out of curiosity, Phil, I was thinking, have you ever had, even just for a moment, have you ever thought, even just for a moment, you know what, with my experience, I don't need a coach. I'm going to do that on my own before deciding to work with Rose, to work with a coach?
Actually, not for a second. And I remember many years ago, probably I think back in 2012, I was working on a TEDx event. And this, I'm not going to mention the name of the speaker that is involved, but the curators, the young students, had said to me, right, well, this guy, be careful, right? He's a very experienced public speaker, world famous, et cetera, et cetera. He probably doesn't think he needs a coach, so you're going to have to tread on eggshells and et cetera to work with him. And I thought, okay, interesting, because the kind of people who think they don't need a coach are usually the ones who need it the most. Now, as it turned out, this guy was a very good public speaker, was very experienced, but he wanted a coach because he wanted to improve and he wanted to get better. And that is important. So I found myself looking back at that and thinking, okay, I think I know how to do this, but it'll be so much better if I do have a coach, because being good is not enough. If you've got it as a strength, develop that strength, right? If Usain Bolt can have a coach, I can have a coach.
There's always room for improvement. And how did you approach your preparation, your rehearsals? How did that go? What was your approach there to prepare for such an important talk?
Well, in terms of rehearsals, I rehearsed quite a lot. Now,
How many
not
times?
everybody will want to do that. How many times? At least 40. At least 40 times. I can't remember exactly. I didn't actually count them, but I did go through it so many times. It was actually a good friend of mine, Celine, who told me once, because she's a musician, and she says when you're in an orchestra, they will tell you, you learn the music not so well that you know it. You learn it so well that you can't get it wrong. And when it comes to a TED or a TEDx talk, very often that's what you need to do. Now, I will say very often, but not all the time. And this contradicts completely what Seth Godin said not so long ago on this very podcast. And I'd love to have that conversation with Seth. But I would say, because just for those who haven't listened to that episode, and believe me, you should, Seth had said you should be improvising it. You should not be learning it all by heart, etc., because then it's not spontaneous and you're not having a conversation with the audience, etc. And I buy all of that. I really love that. However, different people have different styles. Some people have a style where they're perfectly okay improvising, and I think Seth is very much like that. Some people will feel a lot more comfortable if they know very clearly what they are going to be doing. Now, since in this case, I mean, actually, I'm somewhere between the two. I can improvise very nicely. I don't have a problem with that. I would be perfectly comfortable going up on a stage and somebody like you asking me questions or asking me, Phil, can you give us a presentation about boom? And I'd probably be fine. Not everybody would. And in this situation, however, I had, I think, 60 odd slides. Probably too many, but that's a different conversation. But the thing is, a lot of those were the audience transformation roadmap with the case study that I was using and the ideas, and then the sticky notes with the different transformation ideas coming up in there. And you can't improvise that, because every time you use a visual aid, like a slide or whatever, every time you click, that is a a milestone in your presentation that you can't get around. And since I had so many of those in the presentation, I didn't really have very much room to move around and maybe take a side turn and improvise and think about something different. It kind of had to stay on the rails in that particular talk. And I don't do that every time. I'm not doing it now. I don't do it in most of my training courses, but in that situation, it was the right choice. If I had been presenting something very different, I might have done something very different.
Going back to what you mentioned, a couple of thoughts. When I interviewed Seth, I'm like you. I think that rehearsing is super important, and it's not about necessarily memorizing it, unless you are 100% a memorizer. But I think that you, even if you're an improviser, you do need to get closer to internalizing your message, which is different from memorizing it. And for example, for me, and by the way, Seth, maybe for him it works because he's Seth Godin. I'm not Seth Godin, so I do need to rehearse. I'm maybe 70%. So you were talking about you are either maybe an improviser or a memorizer. Maybe I'm 70% towards the memorizers. And that's what works for me. As you said, maybe for Seth, it works differently. For other people, it will work in a different way. And I heard you mentioned that there are three key moments of a TED talk. You were talking about, I think, the title, the conclusion, the intro. Tell me more about this insight, the key moments of a TED talk.
Yeah, this is something that I will always teach to any TED speaker. Now, I'm probably ripping off some methodology from one of the greatest minds in American marketing, a guy called A.G. Lafley. Now, A.G. was actually the CEO of Procter & Gamble while I was working there many years ago. I had the good fortune to meet him. Fantastic guy, excellent leader, excellent manager, brilliant marketer. And he talked about the two moments of truth. Now, when you're Procter & Gamble and when you are selling shampoo, among other products, the first moment of truth is when the shopper is walking down the aisle in the supermarket and they're walking past the shampoo, and either they walk past or they pick up a competitor product or they pick up your product. That's the first moment of truth. And so everything that goes into making them choose your product. So that's the advertising, it's the packaging, it's the product placement, it's the pricing, all of those different things. That contributes to the first moment of truth. The second moment of truth is when you get the shampoo home and you use it and you find out whether you like it. Does it smell good? Does it do your hair good? Are you happy with the result? Because that will determine whether you're going to buy it again. And so everything in terms of the R&D, the formulation, the fragrance, etc., the focus groups, and all of these things contribute to the second moment of truth. So that inspired me a lot. And also, you'll notice it's extremely simple. For a fast-moving consumer goods company, anyone can remember the two moments of truth. And so we remember those simple things. So for TED, I talk about not two, but three moments of truth, or the three moments of TED. The first, as you said, is the title. Now, you've got, if you're doing a TED or a TEDx talk, you've got 100,000 people or so in the room. That's an important audience. The online audience that could be watching either live during or potentially afterwards is a much bigger audience. In my case, like 1,000 times or more than 1,000 times bigger, because I had I think about 800 people in the room, but the online audience afterwards, there's so many more of them. And they're going to be watching on TED.com or on YouTube or on the social media platforms where people will share the link on their Facebook feed or whatever social media you choose to use. And the thing is, there's a complete plethora of available content. And nowadays we have so much content available. We have content overload. What do you choose to click on? And so you need to make sure that your talk has a title that will make the right people click on it. And I say the right people, it doesn't mean everybody, Because if you're going to be doing a talk about molecular biology, or as we did with a fantastic guy a few years ago, epigenetics, for example, you don't need everybody in the world to be watching that talk. But you might need certain people, biology students, for example. You might want biology teachers to be showing it to their kids at school. Certain people, you want them to be interested. So it depends on who your audience is, but you need a title that will make the right people want to click. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how good the talk is, not going to get a lot of views. And therefore, it's not going to touch a lot of people. That's the first moment of truth. The second is the introduction, because how many times, I mean, we talked about this just briefly earlier on, how many times do you start watching a video or a talk or something, but you don't get to the end? So the second moment of truth is after around about 30 seconds, do they want to continue watching that talk? So you've got to do something in the first 30 seconds to grab their attention, right? Something which is maybe unexpected. So I started mine with, most people come to TED because they've succeeded in some area. I'm here because I've failed.
I still remember the introduction. I loved it.
And that is just something, it's surprising. It's like, really? He's failed, but he's on a TED stage. He must have something useful to say. And so emotional reaction, and hopefully with an introduction like that delivered in a good way, people will think, oh yeah, maybe it's worth watching. I'll give this guy I'll give him a few minutes. Let's see how he goes. And that's already the first battle, because so many times you get 30 seconds in and you think, nah, not going to enjoy that one. And it's the way you say it as well, because I could very well have said is, most people are here because they've succeeded. I'm here because I've failed. Probably no one's going to listen. Same words. So that's the second moment of truth. Get an emotional reaction in the first 30 seconds. So we always work with our TED speakers to make sure that the introduction is really powerful. And then the third moment of truth, or the third moment of TED, is that conclusion. Because if at the end of the talk, I mean, you've managed to get them to watch that video, those 5, 10, 14, 18 minutes, all the way to the end, that's fantastic. If at the end they think, that was good, next, then you've got one view. If at the end, instead, they are thinking, oh, that was so good, I should share that with my colleagues or my friends or my class or whoever, then you might get 10 views or 100 or 1,000 out of that one person sharing it. So the third moment of truth is, at the end, do they want to share it? So those are the three key moments of TED: the title, the introduction to make them want to listen, the conclusion to make them want to share.
And Phil, I was thinking that the title, for example, of course, it's crucial for a TEDx talk, for a TED talk, but also in many business presentations, or maybe at conferences, business conferences, rather than, I think that not so many speakers think about, maybe if it goes well, they think about the presentation itself, but if I think about our clients, for example, they don't pay a lot of attention to leveraging the power of a title, because that's the first thing that they see. It doesn't have to be a TED Talk. So rather than quarterly business update in conference room 2, we can find a more interesting title. So I was thinking that. And also, I like to go back to before you mentioned that it was an interesting experience for you to go behind the curtains, also for you delivering a TEDx talk. And as you were delivering your talk, by any chance, did you have any either technical issues that you had to overcome, or any unexpected moments that you had to deal with? And if so, how did you go about it?
There were actually a few. One was that because the audience actually applauded at a time when it wasn't the end of the talk, Now, this was cut off, so if you watch this online, you won't see this. It was cut out of the video. But what actually happened is I got to the end, the point where I threw away the magic wand and said, that's all the magic you'll need. The audience applauded. And then the curator thought, oh, they finished, and walked onto the stage to congratulate me. And I'm like, and actually, it was the second time that had happened on the same evening. Quite remarkable. So that was just, I mean, you could forgive her for thinking it was a conclusion, because it was a good conclusion, and they were clapping. So that was the first thing. But so anyway, the key thing there, and the key thing to remember, is if the unexpected like that happens, or even if something bad happens, like you forget your line, always remember they'll cut it out of the video. Just make it easy for the person cutting out of the video. So you don't have to say something. And so, all right, well, actually, no. So as I was saying before, no, you need to have a good pause, deep breath, smile, and then start again. Probably not with the next sentence, but with the sentence before things were going wrong. The audience won't mind. They've probably forgotten it anyway. And it'll make it so much easier for the technical team to be cutting out and making sure that the good or the bad or the strange occurrence doesn't show up on the video. So that was one unexpected thing that happened. The one thing I wish hadn't happened was that the technical team did not switch on the countdown timer. Now, usually when you're at a conference, and specifically at a TEDx conference, you have a countdown timer. So I had timed my talk for 12 minutes. That was what we were aiming for with all of the talks. We really wanted to keep it to 12 minutes. And so I had practiced with a countdown timer. And I knew, because I was learning it by heart and I'd rehearsed it so many times, because, yeah, like I said, I had so many slides and it had to be pretty much the same words that I'd planned. I'd learned it by heart. I knew where I needed to be with about 10 minutes to go, with about 8 minutes, with 6 minutes to go, etc. And so very quickly, because I had those milestones in my mind, watching, and this happened in rehearsal, I could watch the countdown timer and realize, am I speaking a bit too fast or a bit too slowly? And then I could speed up, or I could calm down or slow down appropriately. And rehearsal was fine. Hit the 12 minutes, no problem. In the live show, they did not switch on the countdown timer. And so I was running blind. I had no clue if I was going too fast or too slow. Now, usually when you're in front of a live audience, you'll end up speaking faster. And so I was, without the guide, making an effort not to speak too quickly. And this is particularly important because I was speaking in English at an event with a French audience. And most of the talks that night were in French. In fact, this year at TEDx Ackley, all of the talks are going to be in French. So I was kind of the exception there. There were only 2 of us who were speaking in English that evening. And so slowing down was something that was natural for me. And it was only later on, when I got the video, that I realized I'd spoken for 14 minutes. And I was like, what? Really? Even with the extra applause in the middle or whatever? Yeah. How could that be? And I went through the transcript because they asked me for the whole transcript, and I realized that out of the whole effectively 14 minutes, I'd maybe changed 2 or 3 words versus what I had planned. Almost everything else was exactly as I had written it. It just took 15% or so longer than what I had planned and what I'd rehearsed, because I'd spoken 15% more slowly. Quite unbelievable.
Before we continue with this episode, I just want to share a few resources that I think will be super useful for you. The first one is check out either my book, Confident Presenter, or my colleague Phil Waknell's book, Business Presentation Revolution, or both. These are books for business owners and leaders who want to take their presentation skills to a higher level. To make the most of the books, take the Confident Presenter Scorecard, which is an online tool that allows you to assess your presentation skills for free in less than 3 minutes. And then also, at the moment, I'm running a series of free presentation skills web classes, and I'd love to see you there. The links are in the show notes. Now let's go back to the episode. But it shows that, and this is something that can be useful for our listeners, for aspiring speakers to consider, is that even if something like that happens, technology fails, then if we are prepared, then we need to be able to go ahead, to accept it, to embrace it, and to go with the flow.
Yeah.
And you've done it. You've done it.
Mm.
And
I had a time in the past, actually. This is not at a TEDx event, but I was at an event with our friends at the European Speechwriter Network many years ago down in Bournemouth in the south of the UK. And I was speaking about how to overcome death by PowerPoint. And I was talking about visual storytelling. Now, this is to a group of speechwriters who generally don't use slides. So by saying that death by PowerPoint is bad, basically, I had an audience that would probably agree with me. By saying PowerPoint can be good, they might not have done. But I didn't get the chance to get there because when I showed the slide which said death by PowerPoint, my Mac crashed. And so this is something that doesn't happen. I mean, like, I use Macs because they're reliable and they don't crash. And there it was, it crashed in live in front of the audience. So I simply said to them, well, like I always say, if you're not prepared to present without slides, you're not prepared to present. And then I just carried on with whatever I had planned to say at the time. And from time to time, I would be going back to my Mac and helping it to reboot and get it up. And then I was able to kind of get the slides back on the screen, not exactly where I'd left it, but a few slides later. So they missed a few slides. No one complained. They didn't know what they'd missed. But it didn't derail the talk. It just didn't have visual aids for a couple of minutes. That's all. It cannot derail your talk. Actually, after that, I had two groups of people come up to me. One group of people then said, Phil, that was amazing. You must have really known your talk. And I was like, yeah, that's why we rehearse when we're speaking, which actually a lot of their customers probably don't do because they discover the talk when they pull it out of the envelope in front of the audience and they're discovering it with the audience. Not a very good thing to happen. And then was another group that came up to me and said, how did you make your Mac crash exactly when it said death by PowerPoint? That was amazing. And I just had to say, a magician never reveals his tricks. Which is probably true, even if I'm not a magician and it wasn't a trick, but I don't like lying.
But you see, you could only deal with that technical glitch effectively because you were prepared, because you've rehearsed. Lee Warren says, if you think about rehearsing, you only have two options. You either rehearse, or even if you think you're not doing it, you are rehearsing, but you are doing it in front of your audience, in front of
Yeah.
your live audience. And he says, and I agree with him, you agree with him too, it's
Oh, yeah.
much better to rehearse not live, but before the presentation. Now, Phil,
Absolutely.
magic wand. Now, you mentioned it earlier. You are well known as a speaker for including what in a company called magic moments, but these are like special moments, very interesting moments, wow moments in your presentations. You've done it with this TED talk, with the magic wand. You've you've done it in the past in a wiki stage talk with hundreds of balloons, which was great. You've done it also with a Christmas tree on stage. So for those who are not familiar with this concept, tell me more about your special moments and why do you do that?
Magic moments. So magic stands for makes a great impression quickly, right? So magic with a Q at the end, not with a C, makes a great impression quickly. So this is a moment, something that you say or you do or you show in the presentation, which people are always going to remember. And which just it's gonna make a huge impact quickly. And I remember when I was like myself discovering TED like 15 years ago, and I was seeing some of the videos online, I was struck, for example, by the chef Jamie Oliver, who was talking about the sugar that our kids ingest in their school milk. And he didn't just show us a graph, he put a wheelbarrow of sugar cubes and poured it on the stage. That is a magic moment. Now, you don't need to do that in your next boardroom presentation or your quarterly project update. However, what happened is, and when I saw him doing that, I was thinking, I've been doing that already because I would be doing that when I was selling print services back at Hewlett Packard many years ago. There'd be times where I would be walking in with a sheaf of paper. right? And I would be saying, how much water does it take to produce this one sheaf of paper, 500 sheets of paper? Or in some cases, I would do the opposite. I would walk in with the paper, with a 6-pack of water bottles and say, how many sheets of paper can you create with this much water? And in some cases, it would be an analogy regarding CO2. Perhaps the most memorable one I had was with a company in Brazil, where I calculated that their paper output in just 1 year in their office, from everything they print and copy or whatever, if you laid all of the pages end to end, there would be enough paper to go from the source of the Amazon all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. And when they heard that, they were like, eh? And then I said, and there's enough to go back up the other bank all the way back to the source. And then their jaws hit the floor and they were, whoa, we have a problem. And the fact that this really does make a great impression and is memorable was struck to me when I was in La Défense, a business area of the wider Paris area, a few years ago. And I was in the building of one of the former customers that I used to work with sometimes at HP. And I remember I had introduced a measure or a metric in their paper usage to try to have them reduce paper usage, the number of days it would take for their paper output to reach the size of this skyscraper that they were in. And I think at one point it was like it was something like 25 days, right? That in less than a month, the paper's going all the way to the roof. And that's like not laid end to end. I mean, that's piled up. And like 10 years later, they still had that metric and it had gone up to, I think, something like 30 or 31 days or something. So that's really interesting to see how some analogy or some different way of showing the data can really be memorable and really hit home. So that's what I try to do when I'm helping a client with a presentation. I try to do it with my own. So don't necessarily take a Christmas tree onto the stage or into your meeting room, but you can use something. You can use some kind of a visual aid on the screen. You can use some kind of analogy or some kind of metaphor that people will remember.
Or maybe a prop, something physical. It could be some sheets of paper, something you say, something you show, something that you do that will make your message unforgettable, even years later, as you shared with the HP example.
Yeah.
And Phil, looking back, what do you talked about, you gave already a lot of practical tips for aspiring speakers, but looking back for your own TEDx talk, what do you think were the key, if there is anything else to add, in addition to what you said, the key factors that contributed to the success of your talk?
What contributed to the success of it? I think we've talked about the title, and I think the title is important. The title was The Three Magic Ingredients of Amazing Presentations. If it had been the 19 magic ingredients, it probably wouldn't have got 1 million views. So 3 is a magic number. 2 is not quite enough. 4 is quite possibly too many. 3 is enough and not too many in many situations. So the rule of 3 is something that you can bear in mind. And I used that when I constructed the talk, and it was good that we had that in the title, I think. Other than that, what else could have contributed to the success? I don't know, maybe people like it. There's always that chance. But I think I really did make a conscious effort with those 3 moments of truth. And at the end, in the conclusion, I really did try to make an effort to suggest that people share this with people that might need it. And some people have, and that's fantastic. I remember being contacted by a good friend of mine in Hungary not so long ago, Peter. And Peter said to me that his son, who I knew when he was like so high, much smaller, his son was now at a business school in the Netherlands. And he said, we were told to watch this video at the school. And so they watched the video. And he said, hold on, I know that guy. And it turned out that this school, without actually bothering to tell me, but they had put my course or my talk on the syllabus. And I think that's fantastic. So if your talk is the kind of thing which teachers or anybody else would think, this is worth sharing, this is worth showing to my students, then that is what's going to make it a successful talk. But you have to approach the talk in a spirit of generosity. And I think this is what makes the difference between a lot of talks, between the ones that succeed and the ones that don't. It's generosity. If you are genuinely there giving something which is for the audience's benefit, and that it's clear to them that it's for their benefit, well, then you've got a pretty good chance of getting a lot of people being interested in it, and therefore sharing it with a lot of people. I had another advantage as well. And that other advantage, compared to a lot of the other talks that are done on TEDx events in France in particular, is I was speaking in English. And that naturally does give a much wider potential audience than the talks that are going on in French, for example, which has a pretty wide audience, but not nearly as wide as the English one, simply because for English, it's the second language of so many people around the world. And therefore, it's much more likely that you're going to get 1 million watches on a TED Talk in English than you would on one in French. Yeah. So there were some natural advantages there too.
Generosity, I'm thinking again, Phil, that the very fact that you chose the ATR, the Audience Transformation Roadmap, which is something that our clients pay us to teach them, to work on it together with them, as the subject of your talk, shows the spirit of generosity that you had as you approached this particular project for you. And instead, in hindsight, is there anything that you would have done differently? And that could be, it could be connected to the content of the presentation, or maybe connected to something else, the preparation, anything that you would have done differently. What do you think?
Yeah, there are probably several things. I mean, it was Dale Carnegie who said that for every talk you give, there are always 3 talks, right? There's the one you prepare, there's the one you give, and then there's the one you wish you should have, you wish you had given. And if I were to do it again today, there are several things I'd probably do differently. I don't know whether I'd still use the magic wand. It's the kind of thing, you love it or you hate it, but you remember it. And therefore I decided, yeah, all right, I'll use it. It was the first time I've ever used the magic wand. Probably the last time. I don't even know where that thing is. I've certainly never used it since. So, but they say that at TED, you don't do your usual shtick. You give something new and original. And it was. Practically everything on there was new and original. And I'm very grateful that it was. I would probably use not nearly as many slides. There are some, particularly in the first half of the talk, there are some slides where I'd look at it now and I think, I really didn't need that. The audience didn't need it. The slides are always for your audience's benefit. And it's like, if it just makes it look prettier, yeah, maybe they don't need that. Maybe it would be better just to have me on the big screen, and they can actually make more of a connection and listen to me rather than thinking, what's that on the screen there? So they weren't necessarily bad slides. They just possibly, they were more than I would use now if I was doing it today. So that's certainly something I would look at differently. I might try and put in a little bit more of myself into the talk. That might be worth doing. I'd probably try to speak for the 12 minutes and not the 14, because I honestly think that when you see one of the talks, this or any other talk online, and you see how long it is, you think, do I have that time? Am I willing to invest that much time to watch this? And a talk which lasts 10 minutes is probably going to have a lot more clicks than a talk that lasts 15 minutes. So I actually would have really preferred this talk to last the 12 minutes that it was planned to last. So that's something I would love to have had different. And honestly, if there's a last thing, I'd probably wear a different suit. Why? Well, I mean, I actually had a comment on YouTube which says this is one of the only suits that looks great. I was thinking, oh, that's nice, thank you. But actually, if you look carefully, I was wearing like a kind of a gray suit. Yeah, it's a nice suit. I like the suit, but the particular red of the carpet reflected the spotlights onto the trousers. So it looked, if you look carefully, the lower half of my trousers actually look a bit pink. Now, I don't mind pink. It's just not the color I was choosing to wear. So I might have considered wearing a different color had I known. But that's one of those things.
I didn't notice that, but now I'll go back and just out of curiosity, I'll go back and check it out.
Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
And you said one of the things you mentioned is I would have maybe going back, I would have tried to put more of myself into the talk. What do you mean, Phil?
Well, the talk had three magic ingredients. The first magic ingredient is the audience. The second is yourself, it's the speaker. And then the third is the transformation that you aim to induce in the audience. And given that I was trying to fit this into the 12 minutes that I was allocated, I didn't have a lot of time to be saying a lot about the second magic ingredient, about putting something of yourself in there. And if I'd had another 30 seconds or so to be able to put something of myself in there, then I would love to do that. I mean, I did at the beginning, right? In the introduction, I was talking about I'm a presentation coach. I've been doing this for a while, etc. But I still haven't succeeded in ridding the world of bad presentations, etc. So there was a bit of me in there. I just feel that there wasn't enough of me in there.
Understood. Understood. And Phil, if you have, let's say that you have an opportunity now to say something, to share a message with the 1 million plus people who viewed your TEDx talk, what would you, is there anything that you would like to tell them? Again, it could be anything.
ROI. That's what I'd like to say. ROI, return on investment. In one way, I'd like to say thanks for investing the time that you invested, whether it's 30 seconds or the whole 14 minutes or so in watching that talk. Thank you for investing that time. But I hope it was an investment not in me, but in yourself. And I hope that the return on investment is there and that it's not just, yeah, that was fun, cool magic wand, nice suit. I hope that it was something like, okay, I can actually apply that and I can use this to build my own presentations. And as many people use this, not just for presentations, but for events and conferences, even for emails, for proposals, for anything, any situation where you need to transform people, well, it can be really useful. And so if you've got that return on investment, if you've actually said, I've used the time, I've learned a little bit about this, I'm going to go and learn more and I'm going to practice this. Well, that's the key thing. So always think about that. Whenever you're telling people something, whenever you're taking their time, effectively, they are investing their time in you. So you've got to make sure you give them a good return on investment. And I hope that those people who watched it, many of them, you can't please everyone, but I hope that many of them have got a return on the investment that they put into watching that talk.
ROI, and you wrote an article on our website where you were very open and transparent. You shared some of the positive, great messages, the comments that you received, for example, either privately or on YouTube. There were some negative messages as well, but you were very open and transparent to share everything. And have I missed something, Phil? Is there a question that I should have asked and I haven't done it? If you anything else I should have asked that I missed?
Oh, gosh. I don't know. I think you've probably covered the subject very well, and I don't know whether people really want to keep listening to me for much longer. However, since you ask, I'll maybe say one or two things for aspiring TEDx speakers, for those people who would love to be able to do this. The first thing I would say is ask yourself why you want to do it. I've been contacted in the last year or so by people who've said, I want to be doing a TEDx talk. And I've asked, well, okay, why do you want to do that? And they said, well, it's good publicity. And that's not the reason, right? That's a reason why people might want to do a TEDx, but you should be having that spirit of generosity. You should be thinking, no, I've got an idea that is worth spreading, and I would love to share it with the world. I would love to share it with a lot of people, and not for my benefit, but for their benefit. So if that is your situation, if you are wanting to speak for somebody else's benefit, then you're in the spirit of TED. If you're wanting to do it because it's good publicity for you, well, find a business conference, find a professional conference or whatever. There are plenty of them around. Those are probably the most appropriate situations, because audiences can usually tell very easily when somebody is there for themselves rather than for the audience. So that's the first point, generosity. If you're there for other people, then you're in the TED spirit. Another thing I would think of is, how original can it be? There are so many TED Talks that have been done, TED and TEDx Talks over the years. we don't need to hear another talk about the same subject. So what can you say? What can you show that is new and original? So if you've done some new research, for example, and as long as that research is properly peer reviewed and not controversial or whatever, then great. TED audience would love to hear about that. If there is something that they've never heard before, great. But a lot of stuff has already been said on a lot of things. So do your research, look into what other people have already spoken about, and then find some new angle, find something new which only you can be talking about. And then the other thing, I think, a lot of people ask me, how do you get selected for a TEDx event?
Phil, before you share your answer, I just received an email this morning with exactly the same question. I said, "Look, I'm going to interview Phil this afternoon, and then we're going to release this episode in a few weeks from now." So yeah, what's your answer to that?
Okay, well, I mean, TEDx curators are always on the lookout for appropriate speakers. So every TEDx event has a theme, right? So there's always a theme. The theme when I spoke at the TEDx Saclay in 2019 was resonance. And so there were a lot of talks which had resonance somehow in the theme. Some talking about fiber optics, some talking about resonance in metals, and I talked about resonance in ideas, for example. So if you spot a TEDx event where the next one coming up in 6 months or so has a theme where you think, you know what, I have an idea worth spreading that is linked to that theme in some way. Well, then in that case, by all means, contact the curator. It's quite possible that 6 months in advance, they're looking actively for appropriate speakers. It's possible in some cases that the TEDx event will have a kind of a call for ideas. So TEDx Saclay actually does have a call for ideas. So they will be selecting several speakers just based on reputation, based on chatting with the person and then inviting them to speak. But they also have competitions where anybody from the community around the area can give a kind of a short talk, a 2-minute version of here's what I'd love to do on the TEDx stage. And then they vote. And the community votes, and the winners in different categories get to be one of the TEDx speakers. And the audience doesn't really realize which ones were invited, which ones were the VIPs, and which ones basically got in through winning the, let's say, the local idea competition. And as it happens, even though I knew everyone at TEDx Saclay, I went through the competition. I didn't say, you know what, I could do a talk here. What do you think? I went through the competition, and the people voted for me, and I'm very grateful that they did. And I hope they're thinking that they made the right choice now that it's got to a million views. But I didn't want to use the contacts I had and basically say, oh, well, he's been selected because I know I wanted to go through the public vote. And that's something that a lot of potential TEDx speakers could do. Not all TEDx events do it. But the overall thing is, if you want to do a TEDx, it's not to become well known. It's actually, if you are well known, if you are a leading expert on your subject, then you might well be invited. So it's more, don't aim to put the cart before the horse, right? Get yourself a name, become somebody to be reckoned with in your field, and then most likely one or more TEDx events will come calling.
I'm very happy with this segment of the interview because then finally, Phil, we've got something that we can use. We get asked that question so often. So we are going to create a small clip. We're going to publish on YouTube, and so we can send it to our audience, to our clients when they ask. Phil, as we approach the end of our conversation, if anybody wants to connect with you and say hi, where should they go? Where do they find you?
Well, the first place a lot of people find me is on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn/in/Waknell. If you can spell my name, then you can find me. There aren't that many of us around the world. It's one of those times where having a very distinctive and unusual surname is actually a real advantage because there's only one of me in the world. And some people around me will say that's more than enough. So LinkedIn is a great place to find me. You can also find me at ideasonstage.com. So If you're on this podcast, you know ideasonstage.com, so you can find me there. And yeah, I post sometimes on other social media, but pretty rarely, to be honest. Most of the time, I'm teaching at business schools, I'm delivering training courses, and so LinkedIn is probably the easiest place to reach out. And by all means do. It will be a great pleasure to hear from you, especially if you've got a story about how you've used the audience transformation roadmap to transform your own communication. I'm always happy to hear those stories.
And of course, Phil, I'm going to include your links, our links in the this is a bit of a special episode in the show notes. And last question.
Yeah.
What's the most important thing? Let's say that someone watches this episode and then after a while they forget most of what we said. It's not your fault, it's just how things work. And let's say that they remember just one thing. And if they remember that thing, you would be happy. We talked about many things today. What is the one thing you would like our listeners to remember from this conversation?
Well, I always say by the time you get to say, so to conclude, you need to assume that people have forgotten practically everything you said, and it won't be far from the truth. So I guess if there's one thing that I would love people to take away from this, it is that simple concept of ROI, return on investment. Whenever you're taking an audience's time to speak to them, they are investing their time in what you have to say. You need to make sure that you're giving them a worthwhile return on that investment. And if they feel that they've got a good ROI, they'll be happy to listen to you again. And that is a pretty good mark of success.
Thank you very much, Phil.
Great speaking to you, Andrea. Speak to you again soon. If you enjoyed this episode of the Ideas on Stage podcast, there are many more you might like. So please subscribe, leave us a review, and tell us what you think. You can find many more ideas on business communication at ideasonstage.com or by searching for Ideas on Stage on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and goodbye for now.